Welcome aboard Bedtime Stories Airline. Tonight, we invite you on a quiet journey through memory, longing, and the fragile wings of fate. This evening's flight is titled, Letters Never Sent. Please, make yourself comfortable. Allow the soft hum of our engines to lull you into ease. The aisle lights have been dimmed, the cabin is calm, and the night sky beyond your window stretches endlessly, as if waiting to cradle your dreams. As we take off into tonight's story, may each word be like a gentle cloud passing beneath you, carrying you closer to rest. And if you are enjoying tonight's journey, kindly fasten your support by subscribing. It helps keep our skies open for more stories. Now, let us begin. The cabin lights glowed faintly golden, and outside the windows the stars hung like scattered pearls over a sea of shadow. The aircraft hummed gently, a low vibration that blended with the storyteller's voice as if the engines themselves were whispering this tale. It begins not in the air, but in a modest room at the edge of a quiet town, where an old postman lay upon his final bed. His breath was shallow, his eyes half closed, and beside him sat his grandson, Daniel, a man in his late 20s, shoulders carrying the weariness of a life that had only just begun to unfold. The old man's hands, veined and trembling, clutched a wooden box. It was worn smooth with time, its corners softened, its brass latch dulled to the color of forgotten sunsets. "Daniel," the old man whispered, his voice brittle as dried leaves. "There is something I never told a soul." Daniel leaned closer, catching the faint scent of old paper and cedar that seemed to cling to his grandfather. "I'm here," he said softly. "What is it?" The old man's eyes flickered open, and in them was both shame and tenderness. "All my life, I carried letters across this town. Love letters, last words, confessions that trembled in ink. But there were some I could not deliver." Daniel frowned, confusion knitting his brow. "What do you mean, couldn't deliver?" "That was your job." The old man coughed, his chest rattling like loose change in a box. "There were letters too heavy for their paper, words I believed might break the hearts meant to receive them. A farewell written by a dying soldier to his wife. A confession of infidelity. A daughter's final words to her mother, written before she vanished. Letters that seemed too cruel, too raw. I thought I was protecting them, so I kept them." Daniel's eyes widened. "You kept them? For how long?" The old man's lips trembled into a weak, sorrowful smile. "Decades, my boy. Decades. They're all in this box. And now I can no longer carry their weight. You must return them. Find the names, the families, if they're still alive. Let the letters finally reach their skies." His grip on the box loosened, and Daniel caught it before it slipped. The old man's eyes clouded with tears. "Promise me." Daniel nodded, though his heart was unsteady. "I promise." And with that, the old postman exhaled one last sigh, as if the burden of all those unsaid words had flown out of him, vanishing into the stillness of the room. Silence followed. Only the ticking of a small clock on the shelf, steady and patient, like the rhythm of the airplane engines carrying you now. Daniel sat in the hush, the box heavy in his lap. He felt as though he had been handed not wood and paper, but years of stolen truths, sealed in fragile envelopes that pulsed faintly, as though alive. He did not open it, not yet. For part of him feared what lay inside. And another part feared that once opened, the words within would no longer be content to stay still. The next morning, with the first pale light sliding through the curtains, Daniel began. The box contained more than 40 envelopes, each bearing names written in neat cursive. Some addresses were familiar, others faded, and still others bore no more than a first name, as though the sender trusted the postman to know where it belonged. The first letter he chose was simple, sealed with brittle wax. It was addressed to Eleanor Fairchild, Rosewood Cottage, Hillside Lane. The ink was faded, but the name stirred something in Daniel's memory. A story his grandfather once told of a woman who waited for years on her porch, watching the horizon as if someone she loved might return. Daniel hesitated only a moment before slipping the letter into his satchel. That afternoon, he set out. Hillside Lane was quiet, shaded by great elms whose branches swayed like watchful arms. Rosewood Cottage stood just as its name suggested, walls of pale stone climbing with ivy, and roses that had grown unruly in the garden. When Daniel knocked, the door opened not to Eleanor Fairchild, but to a young woman in her 30s. Her eyes were curious, her hands still dusted with flour. "Yes," she asked. I'm looking for Eleanor Fairchild," Daniel replied, his voice unsure. The woman's gaze softened. "That was my grandmother. She'd passed away 10 years ago." "Why do you ask?" Daniel's heart sank, yet he held out the letter. "I have something that was meant for her." The woman accepted the envelope, turning it over in her hands. She broke the seal carefully, and as her eyes moved across the page, her lips parted and her breath caught. Tears welled as though the ink had pierced her directly. Daniel stood silent, his chest tightening. Finally, she looked up. "This is from my grandfather," she whispered. "He was a soldier. He died overseas. She always said she never heard from him in the end." Her hands trembled. "But here are his last words. After all these years." Daniel could not speak. The air between them was filled with something fragile and eternal, as though time itself had bent to let love pass through at last. Yet as the woman folded the letter against her chest, Daniel felt a strange unease, like the shiver of turbulence when skies appear clear. Because he noticed something unusual, the letter was signed not only with a farewell, but with a secret, one that Eleanor had never known. And in that moment, Daniel understood these letters were not simply relics. They were keys. And every door they opened might not lead to peace, but to storms still waiting to break. Ladies and gentlemen, we are cruising smoothly through tonight's story skies. If you find comfort in our journey, we invite you to support the flight. Subscribing helps ensure our wings remain strong for more tales to come. Now, let us drift deeper. Daniel walked home from Rosewood Cottage with the first return completed, but his heart was unsettled. That single letter had restored something precious to a family, and yet it had also stirred a shadow, a whisper of secrets that might have changed Eleanor's life had she received it in time. The box waited for him on his desk, silent but insistent. 40 more envelopes, each humming with untold stories. He reached for another, his hands reluctant, as though each choice carried a destiny not only for strangers but for himself. This one bore the name Clara Whitmore, Greenhill Street. The handwriting was elegant, the ink darker, as though pressed down with determination. Clara Whitmore was still alive. Daniel found her in a small apartment above a bookshop, her figure thin, her hair white, her eyes sharp as glass. She welcomed him with suspicion at first, until he explained why he had come. He handed her the letter without explanation, and when she opened it, her expression shifted like storm clouds rearranging themselves across the horizon. She read in silence. Then, after what seemed like forever, she whispered, "I knew he loved me. I knew it. But he never said it. Not once. Until now." Her fingers trembled over the page. "We worked together at the post office, your grandfather and I. He was too shy to tell me, so he wrote this." Daniel's breath caught. This letter was from him? She nodded. Yes. He signed it with his name. A letter he never gave me. And now, all these years later, she pressed the page against her heart and closed her eyes. Daniel left her there in her quiet joy, his chest heavy with questions. His grandfather had not only withheld others' truths, he had hidden his own. Another letter. Another name. This one led Daniel to a man named Henry Graves, who lived alone in a weathered farmhouse at the town's edge. Henry was tall, stooped, his hands stained with soil. The envelope bore his name, and when he opened it, his eyes filled instantly with tears. "This is from my brother," he whispered. "We fought. Bitter words, cruel words. He left for the city, and I never saw him again. And here he wrote to forgive me." His voice broke. "But I never received it. I lived half a century believing he died hating me." He clutched the letter, falling into a chair, his shoulders shaking. "Do you know what it means?" to carry that weight for a lifetime only to learn it wasn't true? Daniel did not answer. He only placed a hand on the man's shoulder, and in the silence between them was a strange blend of sorrow and healing, as though both had tasted the same bittersweet wine. Days blurred. Letters were delivered. Each one pulled Daniel deeper into the fragile architecture of lives interrupted, secrets revealed, farewells completed, love restored or fractured anew. But the deeper he went, the more he felt the letters binding themselves to him, weaving him into their stories as though he, too, were a character written into their ink. And then came the letter that changed everything. It was smaller than the rest, sealed not with wax but with a pressed flower, crumbling and delicate. The handwriting was familiar, too familiar. The name on the front, Daniel Whitmore. His own name. His heart stopped. He turned the envelope over. The sender's name was his grandfather's. The plane jolted with sudden turbulence, as though the skies themselves were echoing Daniel's shock. Glasses rattled on tray tables, and the cabin lights flickered. Daniel held the envelope in shaking hands. Why would his grandfather write to him? And why would he hide it away, never giving it to him? The paper felt warm, almost alive, as though it had been waiting only for this moment. He did not open it. Not yet. Something in him whispered that once opened, everything would change. So he placed it carefully back into the box. But now the journey was no longer about strangers. It was about him. Ladies and gentlemen, as we drift further into the skies of memory and fate, we thank you for flying with us tonight. If you've found comfort in the soft glow of this story, please consider adjusting your seatbelt of support by subscribing or leaving a kind word. It helps keep our cabin filled with future journeys. Now, settle once more. The night is deep, and as mysteries unfold, the final letter will be opened. And in that dreamlike quiet, Daniel sat at his desk once more, the box before him. The unopened envelope bearing his name seemed to pulse faintly under the lamplight, as though it had its own heartbeat. For days, he had avoided it. He delivered the others, each one rewriting someone's past, healing or wounding anew. But this letter, this one felt different. It was not history. It was his. He lifted it with trembling hands. His grandfather's handwriting, the same he had seen on postcards, on birthday cards, on notes left on the kitchen table when Daniel was a boy. Familiar, comforting, and now ghostly. He broke the seal. The letter unfolded with a soft crackle, and his eyes fell upon the first line. To my grandson, Daniel, the letter I could never deliver. His breath caught. The words continued, steady and careful. By the time you read this, I will be gone, and the stories I carried will rest in your hands. But this letter is not about them. It is about us. Daniel read on, his pulse quickening with every line. You must know the truth. The letters I kept were not only to protect others. Some I kept to protect myself. You see, one of them concerns your family. Your father, before you were born, wrote a letter he begged me to deliver. A confession. But I could not. It would have torn everything apart. Daniel froze, the words blurring before him. His father, a man he had loved and lost young, had written something that had never reached its mark. The letter went on. I will not tell you here what he confessed. That letter remains in the box. It is addressed to your mother. If you choose to read it, you may. But know this, my boy, truth is not always a gift. Sometimes it is a storm. And you must decide whether to walk into it or let it pass you by. Daniel's hands shook. His grandfather's letter ended simply. I love you. Forgive an old man's failings. Carry the weight more wisely than I did. Your grandfather. The airplane engines deepened, as though the skies themselves leaned in closer. Daniel searched through the box with frantic care, and there it was, an envelope bearing his mother's name. The one letter his grandfather had warned him of. He held it, his chest tightening as though he could not breathe. The paper was fragile, the ink faint but legible. He could open it now, and in doing so, uncover the truth his grandfather had hidden. Or he could return it sealed, as his grandfather once had, leaving the mystery intact, never knowing what his father had written. The envelope felt impossibly heavy in his hands. Daniel pressed the envelope to his chest. His mother was still alive. She lived only a few streets away. He could walk it to her door tomorrow, knock, and hand her the truth she had been denied for decades. But would it heal her or destroy her? He sat in silence, the question hanging in the air like the plane suspended above the earth, neither here nor there, caught in the space between choice and fate. And so, Daniel kept the letter in his hands as the night deepened, torn between love and truth, silence and revelation. Somewhere outside, the stars pulsed, indifferent yet eternal, as though they had seen countless lives rise and fall on the fragile wings of words never sent. What he chose to do, no one can say. Perhaps he opened it. Perhaps he delivered it. Perhaps he returned it to the box, letting it rest with the others in their endless sleep. And the letter remained unopened. Ladies and gentlemen, we are descending now, gliding into the quiet runway of dreams. If tonight's journey has carried you gently through the skies of memory and imagination, we invite you to stay aboard for future flights. Fasten your support by subscribing, and leave a note in the logbook of comments. Your words help keep our cabin alight. Until we meet again among the stars, thank you for flying with Bedtime Stories Airline. May your dreams be filled with letters, some opened, some waiting, all written upon the endless sky.